My most recent Patreon request included a question: which female creators in the arts are important to me? Perhaps it's that our society still has some undercurrents of maybe undervaluing a woman's work. I didn't want to believe that I had fallen victim to this particular cultural norm. However, I'm ashamed to say that when I thought about film, comic books, or even video games, I couldn't really think of many prevalent names in those fields who were women. Then I thought, up until fairly recently, these were all fields that were mostly dominated from male perspectives. I know this has changed a lot more recently for the better, but not enough that I could honestly say I knew many major creators by name, let alone any that really inspired me personally. So once again, from this particular patron, it was a challenging question. Now, there were certainly actresses, musicians, and visual artists that I could think of, but I don't think that's what the patron was really asking for. Then, before I had sort of a breakdown of shame, I realized that there is one area where I could really find several female creators who did inspire me, and who continue to do so with their works. The answer should have been obvious. What is my greatest avenue for creativity? For those of you that don't know, I'm a writer. So, in fact, there are 3 writers of the female gender who have inspired me. The first would be Anne Rice. Some of you may know her for bringing vampires back into popularity before the Twilight series did, unfortunately. She wrote the Vampire Chronicles, the most famous of her books getting film adaptations. The first was Interview with the Vampire, starring the 90s heartthrobs Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. The other was the less critically received, but still somewhat enjoyed Queen of the Damned, a collection of early 2000s teenage angst wrapped up in gothic imagery and nu metal trends. However, I don't think these films really represent her work very well. Her take on vampires was the first series to really bring a more human element to the mythos, making them less monstrous. It demonstrated that the concept of mortality, while seemingly enjoyable on the surface and desirable, could bring forth all kinds of tragedy, including loss, isolation, madness, and horrifying existential questions. Rice brings these questions to life while still making her characters seem truly human. I also really enjoy the amount of detail she conveys in describing a setting, bringing her readers to the 18th century cathedrals or 1980s rock concerts, and really painting a vibrant picture with these concepts through her words. She also goes into detail about the emotional sensations her characters experience. Her books are pure emotion. That's something I really try to emulate in my own work. Though I enjoy some aspects of her mythology, it could be argued that her vampires become a bit overpowered, and did make way for the overabundance of vampires in later years, to the annoyance of many people. Regardless, I really did enjoy her first 2 novels, Interview with a Vampire and The Vampire Lestat. For fans of horror or just good fantasy fiction, I highly recommend them. The next writer I'd like to mention is a bit more well known. That would be Mary Shelley, the author of a little book called Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. In terms of classical literature, Frankenstein is one of my favorite novels. I find the concept of the story gripping and how strangely modern it seems despite being written in the early 19th century. The idea of a scientist dabbling into the unknown and being dominated by his own ego and leading to dangerous consequences is a great cautionary tale that we can all learn from, whether we're scientists or not. I also love the themes of what it means to be human and the nature of evil, which are universal concepts that are still very relevant today. Even the whole nature versus nurture argument is explored here. I love the dynamic between the creator and the creature, how both go from being sympathetic to despicable to unapologetically tragic by the end of the tale. It's interesting that most people know and prefer the classic Boris Karloff film, which is iconic and is a good story of misunderstanding in its own right, but I do think some of the horror and complexity is lost in the film. The tale loses a bit of its bite to some degree. In the novel, the character is flawed and is arguably doomed to his fate, but we still can't really sympathize with his actions. He's a murderer. It's a difficult scenario to understand. It's challenging. In the film, it's still tragic, but the audience clearly sympathizes with the simple-minded and clearly good monster. It's still a good moral, just a little less interesting of a dynamic. As far as adaptations, I actually really like the 1994 version with Kenneth Branagh. It's a bit cheesy at points, but much closer to the novel. Plus, Robert De Niro is the monster. That's an obvious positive right there. The last female writer is probably the most popular of the 3, at least in terms of recent impact. That would be J.K. Rowling. You know, the lady behind the Harry Potter book series. The reason I would mention Rowling here is pretty obvious. No other book series has impacted my youth as much as Harry Potter. Sure, there were other series I liked, maybe in some ways more. However, no other book series followed me so steadily throughout my youth. I read the first book when I was in third grade, and by the time the final book was released, I was 1 year away from graduating high school. In this way, I had the benefit, as many children in the late 90s did, of being able to grow physically, mentally, and emotionally along with the characters we were reading about. I'm not going to deny that the appeal of the series, to many people as well as myself, does tap into the fundamental idea that we can all feel like outsiders sometimes, and may even sometimes hope for some massive revelation that we're not so unusual, but part of something special, secret, and undiscovered. In terms of character growth, the figurative magic of the wonderful perception children can have often matched the literal magic found in the books. Rowling was very much able to tap into this idea and create such a unique and quirky world, but make it accessible enough that virtually anyone can find something to identify with. We all experience that childlike innocence and wonder at some point. Harry Potter really helps many people feel that way again. In terms of the writing style, I don't think Rowling is technically more impressive than Shelley or Rice, but then here her work is simplistic as it's meant to be a children's book. The simplicity works to its advantage. It's simple, but the narrative flows and there is plenty of detail for world building. I think the most impressive thing about her style, though, is how each book seems to grow more complex in terms of length and also thematic concepts. Harry Potter was essential in helping many children become literate and showed that reading could be both fun and worthwhile. Since the reading level seems to grow with each book, you could theoretically have your child read one book for the last 7 years of their public education, and it could sync up pretty well. What I admire most about Rowling is not only her ability to become a massive success from relatively humble beginnings, but that her creative works managed to touch the lives of so many people in such a positive way. As a writer and a striving creator in many artistic avenues, I hope to emulate such work and also have a positive impact. She's a perfect role model for anyone striving to be creative, man or woman. While I can't say for sure how much the fact that they were women had an effect on their work, I think it's important that there isn't that much that I can distinctively say is feminine per se. Great work isn't purely defined by any one aspect of anyone's life, whether it be gender or anything else. There are many great female artists who continue to impact the world. They need to have more opportunities and recognition. That's all for now. Stay magical.